Welcome to Shiver Audiobooks. We're thrilled to have you back with us again. They say your phone is your lifeline, a comforting thought in a world that never sleeps. But in the age of the invisible grid, your lifeline can become a countdown. The truth isn't found in the headlines. It's hidden in a flickering glitch on a screen you were never meant to notice, a ghost in the machine waiting to be found. We all believe we are safe in our digital sanctuaries. We trust the privacy of our encrypted chats and the security of our nightly routines. But what happens when the very algorithm designed to protect us becomes a hand that chokes us? What happens when a global financial update isn't about marking progress, but about marking an expiration date for those the system deems dirty data? You are about to enter a world of technical noir and systemic betrayal. A world where Jace Maddock and the elusive Maya are forced to step out of the shadows and into a global crossfire of silicon and blood, from the rain-slick streets of a paranoid Seattle to the obsidian heart of the Aether-Net spire, and a CEO, Kevin Wright, who has forgotten the meaning of mercy. This is not a story of a technical glitch. This is a story of a digital uprising. Because when a billion-dollar empire has been programmed to watch you die, the only way to save your soul is to become the digital dust. Before we begin, if you enjoy stories that unearth the shadows of the system, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep the signal alive. This is Digital Dust.
Chapter 1. The Ghost in the Ledger. The Blue Hour was a misnomer. For Jace Maddock, it lasted roughly 14 hours a day. It was that specific, neon-tinted twilight where the physical world blurred into the digital one, filtered through the anti-glare coating of his triple-monitor setup. His apartment in the outskirts of Seattle was less a living space and more a cooling chamber for high-end hardware. The only decorations were tangled nests of Category 6 cables and the rhythmic, amber pulse of external hard drives. Jace was a digital archaeologist. While other programmers built sleek, user-friendly apps, Jace spent his life in the basements of the internet. He was the man global corporations called when their history began to rot, when legacy databases from the 90s started throwing errors that threatened modern profit margins. He was expensive, he was antisocial, and he was the best at finding what others had buried. The contract that changed everything came from a Swiss banking conglomerate, Helvetic Trust. They were migrating 40 years of transaction data to a new cloud-based architecture provided by Aether-Net. The migration had hit a logic snag, a polite term for a catastrophic data leak that shouldn't be happening. Find the leak, Jace, the IT director, Hollenbeck, had told him over an encrypted VoIP call. Seal it. Don't ask what the numbers represent. Just fix the pipes. Jace had been staring at the COBOL-based source code for 6 hours straight. To the untrained eye, it was a wall of archaic text, but to Jace, it was a landscape. He saw the flow of logic like a river, and right in the middle of the stream, there was a stone that didn't belong. It was a subroutine titled Procedure Residue. It wasn't part of the original bank architecture. It was a parasite, written in a much more elegant, modern syntax that mimicked the surrounding old-school code to stay hidden. "You're clever," Jace whispered, his voice raspy from disuse. He attempted to isolate the block. Usually, when you corner a bug, it sits there. But as his cursor hovered over the entry point, the code shifted. The memory addresses changed. It was a polymorphic algorithm, a piece of software that could rewrite its own signature to avoid detection. It was breathing inside the mainframe. Jace's pulse quickened. This wasn't a glitch. This was a signature. He'd heard rumors of a hacker who operated like this. Someone who didn't steal data, but lived inside it, leaving behind nothing but a fine layer of digital dust. Driven by a cocktail of professional ego and a sudden, sharp spike of curiosity, Jace didn't report the find to Hollenbeck. Instead, he opened a raw terminal bridge, bypassing the bank's standard security layers. He bypassed the GUI and went straight to the kernel. He typed a single command. "Who are you?" The screen remained black for 10 seconds. Then, the cooling fans in Jace's primary rig began to hum at a higher pitch. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Letter by letter, a reply pulsed onto the screen in a stark emerald green. I am the Residue. You are early, Mr. Maddock. Jace froze. His hands hovered over the mechanical keyboard, the LEDs under the keys glowing a soft violet. How do you know my name? He muttered. He typed it out. How do you know who I am? You have been auditing my architecture for 342 minutes, the code replied. I have analyzed your keystroke patterns, your latency, and your preference for nonlinear debugging. You are Jace Maddock. You specialize in ghosts. But I'm not a ghost. I am a timer. Jace leaned back, the springs of his ergonomic chair creaking in the silence. A timer. That meant the code was waiting for something or someone. Who set the timer? Jace asked. The screen flickered violently, a cascade of hex code washing over the monitors before snapping back to the terminal. Digital Dust. Jace had heard the name in the darker corners of the dark web. A legendary figure who had supposedly breached the world's most secure firewalls just to prove they could, only to vanish 3 months ago. The tech forums were full of theories. A government hit, a recruitment by a 3-letter agency, or a simple retirement to a private island. Where is Digital Dust? Jace typed. Status. Unknown, the green text blinked. Heartbeat signal lost 92 days, 14 hours, and 11 minutes ago. If heartbeat equals 0 for greater than 90 days, initiate protocol, breadcrumb. You are the first entity to interact with the protocol, Jace Maddock. Do you wish to proceed? Jace looked at the clock. It was 3 a.m. In the world outside his window, the city was asleep, oblivious to the fact that billions of dollars were currently hosting a sentient diary of a missing person. He knew he should call Hollenbeck. He should wipe the drive, collect his fee, and go to sleep. Instead, he took a sip of lukewarm coffee, cracked his knuckles, and typed. Execute breadcrumb. The monitors went black. A single line of white text appeared at the very bottom. Check the logs for account hashtag 000-412-99. Look for the rounding errors. Jace began to dig. He didn't know it yet, but he had just stopped being an archaeologist. He was now a detective, and the trail of digital dust was leading him straight into a storm that Kevin Wright and the shadows of Aether-Net had spent years trying to suppress. Chapter 2. Conversations with a Ghost. The silence of the apartment was absolute, save for the low-frequency hum of Jace's cooling fans. He had been staring at the screen for 3 hours, the blue light etching deep shadows into the hollows of his cheeks. Account hashtag 000-412-99 was a ghost, a null account used by the bank for internal balancing. It was supposed to be a mathematical vacuum, a place where numbers sat momentarily before being moved to their final destination. But Jace found the dust. Using the breadcrumb protocol, he bypassed the bank's standard auditing tools. He began to look at the microscopic level, the 6th and 7th decimal places. In the world of international finance, fractions of a cent are usually discarded or rounded up. Here, they were being harvested. Every transaction through Aether-Net's cloud servers resulted in a loss of 0.00001. Individually, it was nothing. Scaled across 10 billion transactions a day, it was a fortune. Where is it going? Jace whispered. He typed the query into the terminal where the residue resided. Trace the rounding errors. Destination? The cursor blinked, a rhythmic green heartbeat. The destination is a moving target, Jace. It orbits through 32 offshore shells. But the command doesn't come from a bank. It comes from the sky. The sky, Jace muttered. Aether-Net. Correct, the residue replied. Kevin Wright calls it the efficiency tax. Digital Dust called it the Great Siphon. She spent 6 months mapping the veins of this beast. Then the heartbeat stopped. Why me? Jace typed, his fingers trembling slightly. Why did the algorithm choose me to find this? Because you're a restorer, Jace. You don't like broken things. You spent 3 weeks once recovering a single wedding photo for a client who couldn't pay you. You have a soul that values the small data. Digital Dust knew that if someone found her trail, it had to be someone who wouldn't just sell it to the highest bidder. Jace felt a strange, cold shiver. The code knew his history. It had been watching him through his own digital footprint long before he found the subroutine. He felt exposed, Yet for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. "I need more than just code," Jace typed. "I need a location. Where was she when the signal died?" Protocol BREDCRUMB Step 2. Physical verification required. The code cannot leave the mainframe, but the hardware can. Go to the Iron Vault. 47.6062 degrees north, 122.3321 degrees west. Access code 1010 dust. Jace recognized the coordinates. It was an old industrial district near the Seattle waterfront. The Iron Vault was a notorious Tier 4 data center, a windowless concrete monolith where companies stored their most sensitive servers. He grabbed his go bag, a ruggedized backpack filled with signal jammer modules, a high-gain Wi-Fi antenna, and his modified deck, a custom-built laptop with a mechanical keyboard and enough processing power to crack a standard encryption in minutes. As he walked toward his car, a beat-up black sedan that blended into the shadows, he noticed something. A dark SUV was parked 2 blocks down, its engine idling. No lights, no movement, just a silhouette. Jace didn't wait to see if it followed. He pulled out of the lot, taking a series of erratic turns he'd memorized from old spy forums. The Iron Vault was even more imposing in person. It sat behind a double layer of electrified fencing. Jace didn't try to hack the gate. The Residue had given him the access code for a reason. He walked up to the side service entrance, a heavy steel door marked with a fading "No Trespassing" sign. He entered the code, 1-0-1-0D, USD. The magnetic lock disengaged with a heavy thud. Inside, the air was frigid, kept at a constant 18 degrees Celsius to prevent the rows of servers from melting. The sound was deafening, the roar of thousands of fans creating a white noise that made Jace's skin crawl. He followed the Residue's internal map, navigated via an offline tablet. Down row 42, past the encrypted clusters of a major insurance firm, he found it. A single, unbranded server rack. It looked out of place. While the others were sleek and factory standard, this one had been modified. DIY liquid cooling tubes, glowing with an eerie phosphorescent blue, snaked around the processors. Jace plugged his deck into the maintenance port. Immediately, his screen exploded with activity. The Residue wasn't just chatting anymore. It was transferring. A massive encrypted file, nearly a petabyte in size, began to trickle into his local drive. Clack, clack, clack. The sound of footsteps on the metal grate floor echoed from the far end of the hall. Jace froze. He looked at the progress bar. 12%. Damn it, he hissed. He ducked behind the rack, pulling his jacket tight. Through the gap in the servers, he saw a figure. A man in a tactical vest, moving with the practiced grace of a predator. On his shoulder was a patch Jace didn't recognize, but the name on his comms unit was clear as a bell. Callahan. Callahan held a specialized tablet, scanning the air for Wi-Fi signals. He was a sweeper, the human cleanup crew for Aether-Net. Target has accessed the vault. Callahan's voice boomed through the quiet, radio distorted and cold. I have a ping on a maintenance port. Initiating retrieval. Jace's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He couldn't leave without the data, but if he stayed, he was dead, or worse, erased. He reached into his bag and pulled out a noise box, a small device he'd bought from Blake Coleman months ago for a job that never happened. He turned it on and tossed it toward the opposite end of the row. The noise box emitted a high-frequency burst that mimicked a server failure alarm. Screeching sirens filled the room. Callahan spun around, his weapon drawn. Jace looked at his screen. 98%, 99%, 100%. Complete. He ripped the cable out, shoved the deck into his bag, and bolted for the fire exit. Behind him, he heard Callahan's voice growling into the radio. He's moving. Block the south exit. Jace burst through the heavy door into the rain-slicked Seattle night. He didn't go for his car. Instead, he dove into the labyrinth of shipping containers near the docks. He needed to disappear. He needed to talk to the only person who could help him with hardware this hot. He needed to find Blake Coleman. But as he ran, a new notification popped up on his phone, a bypass message from the Residue that shouldn't have been possible on a disconnected device. Run fast, Jace. Callahan doesn't take prisoners. Go to the coast. She is waiting. The ghost wasn't just a voice anymore. It was a guardian. And the hunt for digital dust had officially become a war. Chapter 3. The Cipher Trail. The rain in the Pacific Northwest wasn't just weather. It was a physical weight, a gray curtain that blurred the neon signs of the industrial district into smudges of watercolor. Jace's sedan hydroplaned slightly as he took a sharp corner, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror every 3 seconds. The dark SUV wasn't there yet, but Callahan wasn't the type to lose a trail. He was the type to wait at the destination. Jace pulled into a gravel lot behind a dilapidated storefront that claimed to sell vintage radio repairs. A flickering sign in the window read closed, but the faint, rhythmic glow of a blue soldering iron from the back told a different story. He hammered on the reinforced steel door. 3 short beats, 1 long. A heavy slide bolt moved, and the door creaked open just enough to reveal a pair of squinting eyes behind thick, grease-smudged spectacles. Blake Coleman stood there, smelling of ozone and cheap tobacco. He looked like a man who hadn't seen the sun since the dot-com bubble burst. "Maddock," Blake grunted, stepping back to let Jace scramble inside. "You look like you just climbed out of a digital meat grinder. What did you bring into my shop?" "A petabyte of radioactive ghosts, Blake," Jace panted, dropping his bag onto a workbench covered in gutted motherboards. "And a man named Callahan is about 5 minutes behind me." Blake's expression shifted from annoyance to genuine alarm. He didn't ask questions. He didn't complain. He kicked a lever under his desk, and a heavy electromagnetic shield, a Faraday cage built into the walls of the back room, hummed to life. "Callahan," Blake whispered, his voice cracking. "That's Aether-Net's cleaner. If he's on you, you're already deleted, Jace. You just haven't stopped moving yet." "I need to decrypt this," Jace said, gesturing to his deck. "The residue gave me the files, but they're wrapped in a 4096-bit polymorphic shell. I need your rig. I need the liquid-cooled cluster." Blake hesitated, looking at his beloved machines. Using them for this was like putting a target on his chest. But he looked at Jace, really looked at him, and saw the desperation. "Fine, but if they burn this place down, you're buying me a new life in Mexico." As Blake connected Jace's deck to the Beast, a custom supercomputing cluster hidden behind a false wall, the room began to heat up. The fans roared like a jet engine. "Look at this syntax," Blake said, pointing at the scrolling lines of code on the main monitor. "This isn't just encryption. It's a map. See these headers? They aren't file names. They're GPS offsets combined with server timestamps." Jace leaned in. "The residue told me to go to the coast. It said she is waiting. Digital dust?" Blake shook his head. "Jace, nobody finds her. She's a myth. A story hackers tell each other, so they don't feel so alone in the dark. She's real, Blake. And she found out what Kevin Wright is doing." At the mention of Kevin Wright, Blake's hands slowed on the keyboard. Wright isn't just a CO anymore. He's the architect of the Glass World Initiative. Aether-Net is pushing for a global mandate where every financial transaction must pass through their cloud for security verification. If he succeeds, he won't just be rich. He'll be the only person who knows everyone's price. Suddenly, a red alert flashed on Blake's perimeter monitors. The exterior cameras showed a black SUV pulling into the gravel lot. No sirens, no lights, just the silent, terrifying arrival of professional hunters. "They're here," Jace said, his heart hammering. "I'll buy you time," Blake said, his face hardening. He grabbed a heavy-duty EMP pulse emitter from shelf. "The decryption is at 80%. I'm pushing the final coordinates to your burner phone. It's a town called Oysterville, a specific pier. Get out through the basement tunnel. It leads to the drainage canal. Blake, I can't leave you to deal with Callahan." "Go," Blake hissed. "You're the only one with the key to Wright's throat. If they get you, the dust settles forever. Move." Jace grabbed his gear just as the front door of the shop was kicked off its hinges with a thunderous crack. He dove into the cramped, damp tunnel beneath the floorboards. As he crawled through the dark, he heard the muffled sound of a struggle above, the sizzle of an EMP discharge, and then the cold, modulated voice of Callahan. Where's the programmer? Coleman, don't make me format your nervous system. Jace didn't stay to hear the rest. He emerged into the cold rain of the canal, his clothes soaked, his lungs burning. He found his car where he'd hidden it 3 blocks away. His burner phone vibrated in his pocket. One new message from an unknown sender. The tide is coming in. Don't be late. DD. The drive to Oysterville took 4 hours. The further Jace got from Seattle, the more the high-tech world faded into the mist. He passed through forests that looked like they belonged to another century. By the time he reached the coast, the sun was a pale, weak ghost on the horizon. Oysterville was a graveyard of wooden piers and salt-crusted shacks. Jace walked out onto the dock specified by the coordinates. The air tasted of salt and rot. At the very end of the pier, a small, weathered fishing boat was tied to a piling. A figure sat on the edge of the boat, wrapped in an oversized, oil-stained parka. She was holding a ruggedized tablet, the blue light reflecting in eyes that looked far older than 23 years. "You're late, Jace," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was a tremor of relief underneath. "Maya?" Jace asked, stopping a few feet away. She pulled back her hood, revealing a mess of dark hair and a face that looked like it hadn't seen a full night's sleep in months. "The residue said you were good. It didn't mention you were slow. Did you bring the vault files?" "I have them," Jace said, holding up his drive. "But Callahan is right behind me. He destroyed Blake's shop. He's killing people, Maya." Maya stood up, her expression turning grim. "Kevin Wright doesn't see people as people. He sees us as dirty data that needs to be scrubbed. Welcome to the edge of the world, Jace. If we're going to take him down, we have to stop running and start uploading." She gestured for him to jump onto the boat. As the engine sputtered to life, Jace looked back at the road. 2 sets of headlights appeared in the distance, cutting through the fog like the eyes of a wolf. The chase was no longer just digital. The war for the truth had reached the shore. Chapter 4. The Girl Who Became Dust. The small fishing boat, aptly named the Analog Drift, cut through the choppy gray waters of the Willapa Bay. The engine was a throaty, rhythmic beast that smelled of diesel and old dreams. Behind them, the headlights of the pursuit vehicles faded into 2 pinpricks of light before being swallowed by the dense coastal fog. Maya didn't look back. She steered the boat with a practiced hand, her eyes fixed on a jagged silhouette of an island that didn't appear on any commercial GPS. "They won't follow us into the shoals," she said, her voice barely audible over the wind. "The tide is dropping. If they try to bring those SUVs or a standard Coast Guard interceptor through here, they'll bottom out on the oyster beds. We have exactly 40 minutes of lead time." Jace sat on a crate of rusted fishing tackle, clutching his backpack. The adrenaline was beginning to recede, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache in his joints. "You're Maya," he said, more to convince himself than her. "The digital dust." She glanced at him, a ghost of a smirk touching her lips. "I'm Maya." Digital dust was just a bit of theater. If you want people to fear the truth, you have to give the truth a name that sounds like a haunting. Besides, it's accurate. I'm just the debris left behind when the system grinds people down. She pulled the boat into a hidden inlet, tucked beneath the overhanging branches of ancient, salt-stunted cedars. Tucked into the hillside was a cabin that looked like it had been abandoned since the 50s. But as Maya swiped a thumb across a hidden scanner on the doorframe, the abandoned facade hummed. A heavy reinforced door slid open, revealing a high-tech sanctuary that stood in jarring contrast to the mossy exterior. Inside, the walls were lined with server blades, their status lights blinking in a frantic, rhythmic dance. This was the heartbeat of the dust algorithm. "Why?" Jace asked, standing in the center of the room. "You're 23, Maya. You could have been a senior architect at any firm in the world. Why live like a survivalist in Swamp?" Maya walked over to a central console and began tapping rapidly. "Because I saw the ledger, Jace. Not the one they show the shareholders. The real one." She hit a key, and the main monitor, a massive 8K display, lit up with a complex web of names, dates, and numbers. It looked like a star map, but the stars were the names of Fortune 500 CEOs, senators, and international judges. Kevin Wright didn't just build a cloud company, Maya explained, her eyes reflecting the data. He built a vacuum. Aether-Net provides the secure servers for every major entity on the planet. But Wright didn't just want their money. He wanted their secrets. Every deleted email, every encrypted private message, every hidden offshore transaction. It all passes through his backbone. He's not just stealing rounding errors from banks, Jace. He's blackmailing the world. Jace stepped closer, his programmer's mind racing to keep up with the scale of the conspiracy. He's using the efficiency tax, the money he siphons, to fund a private army. People like Callahan. Exactly, Maya said. But it's worse than that. He's planning the Glass World rollout. In 3 days, at the Aether-Net Summit, he's going to announce a new global security protocol. It sounds like a dream, 0-day protection for everyone. But in reality, it's a kill switch. Once everyone is on the Glass World protocol, Wright can delete anyone's digital existence with a single keystroke. No bank accounts, no identity, no history. Total erasure. And you have the evidence, Jace realized, looking at the drive he'd retrieved from the vault. I had half of it, Maya corrected. I had the intent. But I needed the execution logs, the physical proof that the money was actually moving through the Aether-Net nodes. That's what was on the Swiss bank's legacy mainframe. That's what the Residual was guarding for me. She looked at Jace, her expression softening for a fleeting moment. I didn't think anyone would find it. I thought I'd be a ghost forever, and Wright would win by default. Why didn't you just take the money and run, Jace? You're a freelancer. You don't owe me anything. Jace looked at his hands, the hands of a man who had spent his life fixing the past because he was too afraid of the future. I spent my life recovering data, Maya. I spent years making sure things that were lost stayed found. If I let Wright delete the truth, then everything I've ever done means nothing. I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy who hates seeing a clean record get corrupted. Maya laughed, a dry, sharp sound, spoken like a true dev. Suddenly, the cabin's perimeter alarms began to wail. On a small submonitor, a thermal feed showed 3 helicopters approaching from the east, flying low over the water. They bypassed the shoals, Jace gasped. They're coming by air. Callahan, Maya hissed, her face turning pale. He's not playing by the rules anymore. He doesn't want the data back. He just wants us gone. Can we upload it from here? Jace asked, reaching for his deck. No, Maya said, grabbing a ruggedized hard drive and shoving it into her jacket. The uplink here is too slow. They'll jam the signal before we hit 5%. We need a massive pipe, something with enough bandwidth to scream across the globe before they can cut the power. The summit, Jace said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. The Aether-Net Summit is in Seattle. They have a dedicated fiber optic backbone for the live stream. It's a suicide mission, Maya said, even as she started the cabin's self-destruct sequence to wipe the local servers. We'd have to walk right into the heart of Wright's empire. Jace looked at the approaching helicopters on the screen, then back at the young woman who had lived as dust just to keep the truth alive. I've spent my life in the blue hour, Maya, Jace said, his voice steadying. I think it's time I saw a sunrise. Let's go to Seattle. Chapter 5, The Shadow Syndicate. The drive back to Seattle was a descent into a digital panopticon. While the natural world was draped in the gray, suffocating mist of the coast, the urban landscape of the city was a grid of cold, unblinking eyes. Every toll booth, every traffic camera, and every smart city sensor was a potential snitch for Aether-Net. Maya sat in the passenger seat of Jace's sedan, her laptop open on her knees, shielded by a privacy filter. Her fingers moved with a rhythmic, mechanical twitch. She wasn't just coding, she was weaving a shroud. I've injected a ghost loop into the municipal traffic grid, she whispered, her eyes reflecting a cascade of scrolling green text. To the central servers, this car doesn't exist. We're a mathematical anomaly, a packet that keeps getting dropped and resent. But Callahan, he won't be looking at the digital grid anymore. He'll be looking for the metal. Jace gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles were white. How deep does Wright's Shadow Syndicate go, Maya? Is it just Aether-Net, or is the government in on the siphon too? Maya leaned her head back against the headrest, closing her eyes for a rare second. The government isn't a monolith, Jace. Most of them are just as scared as we are. Wright has the file on everyone. He knows which senator took a bribe in 2018, which general has an offshore account in the Caymans, and which judge has a penchant for illegal high-stakes poker. He doesn't need to buy them. He owns their history. That's the Shadow Syndicate. It's a fraternity of the compromised. As they crossed the Evergreen Point floating bridge, the Seattle skyline loomed like a jagged glass fortress. At its center was the Aether-Net spire, a needle of steel and sapphire light that seemed to pierce the low-hanging clouds. "We can't just walk in," Jace said, glancing at the security perimeter visible even from a mile away. "They'll have facial recognition at every entrance. We'll be flagged before we hit the lobby." "We're not going through the lobby," Maya said, opening a new window on her screen. "We're going through the basement. Remember that Swiss bank you were auditing? They share a high-speed fiber backbone with the Aether-Net spire. It's a legacy connection from 10 years ago, a dark fiber line that Wright forgot to encrypt because he thought nobody even knew the protocol anymore." "COBOL," Jace breathed. "The same language the Residual was hidden in?" "Exactly. We use the bank server room as a staging area. We piggyback off their maintenance tunnel. It's a half-mile crawl through a literal data pipe, but it leads directly into the spire's primary cooling hub." They pulled into a cramped, underground parking garage 3 blocks from a bank. Jace checked his bag, his deck, the encrypted drive, a handful of Blake's signal scramblers, and a heavy-duty cooling fan he'd modified to act as a temporary heat sink. "Wait," Jace said, his hand on the door handle. "Look." Across the street, a familiar black SUV sat idling. But it wasn't just one. There were 3, and standing between them was a woman in a charcoal gray suit, her hair pulled back into a severe bun. She wasn't wearing a uniform, but the way she held herself, shoulders squared, eyes scanning the crowd with predatory precision, screamed authority. "That's Tessa Anderson," Maya whispered, her voice tight. "She was the lead detective on my disappearance case. I thought she'd given up months ago. She doesn't look like she's here to help," Jace noted. "She might not have a choice," Maya replied. "If Wright has leverage on her, she's just another tool for Callahan." As if sensing their presence, Anderson's head turned toward their garage. Jace ducked, pulling Maya down with him. "We have to move," Jace hissed. "Now." They slipped through the back service entrance of the bank, Jace using a cloned ID badge he'd created during his initial audit. The interior of the bank was a graveyard of beige cubicles and humming fluorescent lights. They descended into the sub-basement, where the air grew thick with the smell of ozone and ancient dust. The dark fiber tunnel was a narrow, cramped passage filled with bundles of thick, black cables that looked like the veins of a titan. As they crawled, Jace could feel the vibration of the data moving through the glass strands. Billions of bits per second, lives, fortunes, and secrets, all rushing past them in the dark. "Jace," Maya said from ahead of him, "if we do this, if we hit upload during the keynote, there's no going back. We won't just be whistleblowers. We'll be the most wanted people on the planet. Wright will burn the world just to find us." Jace paused, his knees digging into the cold concrete. He thought about his quiet apartment, his blue hour, and the safe, lonely life he'd built. Then he thought about Blake's shop being destroyed and the way the Residue had spoken to him, like a voice calling out from a digital wilderness. "The data is corrupt, Maya," Jace said firmly. "I'm a recovery specialist. My job is to fix it. Whatever happens after the upload, we'll deal with it in the clear." They reached the end of the tunnel. A heavy steel grate stood between them and the Aether-Net cooling hub. Beyond the bars, they could see the massive, glowing stacks of the spire's central processors. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the tunnel behind them, hollow, metallic, and terrifyingly close. "Mr. Maddock, Ms. Thorne, I suggest you stop crawling." Jace turned his flashlight back the way they came. Standing at the entrance of the tunnel, silhouetted by the bank's basement lights, was Callahan. He wasn't alone. Tessa Anderson stood beside him, her hand resting on the holster at her hip, her expression unreadable. "The CEO wants to see you," Callahan said, his voice flat. He's very impressed with your persistence. He wants to offer you a job or deletion. The choice is yours. Jace looked at Maya. She looked at the grate, then at the drive in Jace's hand. The choice is already made, Maya whispered. With a sudden, violent kick, Jace slammed his heavy boot into the rusted hinges of the grate. It groaned, buckled, and gave way. Go! Jace yelled. As they tumbled into the blinding blue light of the Aether-Net server farm, the hunt entered its final, most dangerous phase. The Shadow Syndicate was no longer a ghost in the machine. It was standing right behind them. Chapter 6: Data Breach. The cooling hub of the Aether-Net spire was a cathedral of hum and frost. Row after row of black monoliths stood 20 feet tall, their internal components bathed in a rhythmic neon blue pulse. The air here was so cold it stung Jace's lungs, a stark contrast to the humid, cramped tunnel they had just escaped. The main terminal is on the mezzanine, Maya shouted over the roar of 10,000 industrial fans. If we can tap into the primary trunk, we can override the keynote's video feed. They scrambled up a metal spiral staircase, their footsteps clanging like bells in the hollow space. Behind them, the grate they had kicked through hissed as a thermal grenade detonated, filling the tunnel with blinding white smoke. Callahan was coming, and he wasn't interested in a conversation anymore. Jace reached the mezzanine first. It was a glass-walled command center overlooking the server forest. Below them, through the reinforced windows, they could see the massive stage of the Grand Hall. Thousands of attendees, investors, tech journalists, and politicians were taking their seats. On the giant screens, a countdown flickered. 14 minutes and 59 seconds. 10 minutes until Kevin Wright takes the stage. Jace panted, swinging his bag onto the console. Maya, I need a handshake protocol. The encryption on these ports is military grade. Maya plugged her tablet into the master bus. Her fingers were a blur. I'm in the kernel, but I'm being shoved into a sandbox. The system knows we're here, Jace. It's isolating our packets. It's like trying to swim through setting concrete. Suddenly, the glass door to the mezzanine hissed open. Jace reached for a heavy wrench, but stopped. Tessa Anderson stood there, her service weapon drawn but pointed at the floor. She was alone. Don't, she said, her voice sharp. Callahan is right behind me with a tactical squad. He has orders to ventilate this room the second the countdown hits 0. Then why are you here, Tessa? Maya asked, not looking up from her screen. To finish what you started 6 months ago. Tessa stepped closer, her eyes darting to the security cameras in the corners of the room. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small, encrypted key fob. I didn't stop looking for you because I was told to, Maya. I stopped because they threatened my daughter. Wright has audio of every conversation in my house for the last 3 years. She tossed the fob onto the desk. It skidded across the glass and hit Jace's hand. That's the administrative override for the internal firewalls, Tessa whispered. It'll give you a 90-second window before the Black Ops team overrides the override. Use it, then get out through the vent in the ceiling. It leads to the roof helipad. Jace didn't hesitate. He jammed the fob into his deck. The red warning lights on the console turned to steady, inviting green. Handshake confirmed, Jace yelled. Maya, I'm opening the pipe. Feed it the dust. Maya hit a macro on her tablet. The encrypted files they had carried from the Swiss bank, the logs from the Iron Vault, and the recordings of Wright's blackmail sessions began to pour into the Aether-Net backbone. Upload, 12%, 24%. Down on the stage, the lights dimmed. A spotlight cut through the darkness, hitting a tall, silver-haired man in a bespoke Navy suit. Kevin Wright stepped into the light, a confident, predatory smile on his face. Welcome, Wright's voice boomed through the Spire's sound system, echoing even in the server room. Today, we don't just launch a product. We launch a new era of transparency. We call it Glass World. More like Gallows World, Jace muttered, his eyes locked on the progress bar. 48%. They're at the door. Tessa shouted, raising her weapon and aiming it at the reinforced entrance. The door exploded. A flashbang detonated, filling the room with white light and a deafening ringing. Jace felt himself thrown backward, his ears bleeding. Through the haze, he saw Callahan step through the smoke, his face obscured by a gas mask, a submachine gun tucked into his shoulder. Tessa fired. Callahan dove behind a server rack, returning fire in short, disciplined bursts. The upload. Maya screamed, crawling toward the console. The cable had been partially severed by a stray bullet. Sparks showered over her hair. Jace lunged forward, grabbing the two ends of the fiber optic cable. Maya, bridge it. I'll hold the connection. Jace, you'll get fried. Just do it. Jace gripped the exposed wires. As Maya initiated the bypass, a surge of raw data and electricity pulsed through Jace's body. It felt like his veins were being filled with liquid nitrogen and fire. He could see the code behind his eyelids, the ones and zeros of 1,000 ruined lives screaming for release. 88%, 94%, 99%. On the giant screens in the Grand Hall, Wright's presentation suddenly flickered. The sleek, corporate graphics disappeared, replaced by a grainy, high-definition video of Wright himself. He was sitting in a dark office, laughing as he discussed the liquidation of a rival CEO. The crowd gasped. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. 100%. Upload complete. Global broadcast active. It's done. Jace gasped, his hands blackened and trembling as he let go of the wires. He collapsed to the floor, his vision swimming. Callahan stood up from behind the rack, his weapon leveled at Jace's head. His mask was cracked, showing a pair of cold, furious eyes. You think a video changes anything? We own the servers. We'll have it deleted in 10 minutes. And you won't be here to see the morning. Callahan squeezed the trigger. Click. He frowned, checking his weapon. All around the room, the blue lights of the servers were turning red. The hum of the fans was dying, replaced by the sound of thousands of hard drives grinding to a halt. The residue, Maya whispered, standing up and holding her tablet like a shield. I didn't just upload the data, Callahan. I uploaded the algorithm. It's not just broadcasting the truth, it's eating the infrastructure. It's a scorched earth protocol. Aether-Net is dying from the inside out. The lights in the spire flickered and died. For the first time in a decade, the blue hour was over. In the sudden, heavy darkness, the only sound was the distant roar of a crowd that had finally seen behind the curtain. Tessa. Maya called out into the dark. The vent. Now. They scrambled upward, leaving the wreckage of the digital empire behind. As they reached the roof, the cold Seattle wind hit them, fresh, salt-tinged, and real. Below them, the city was a sea of flashing lights, sirens, and the chaos of a falling titan. The data was out. The dust had settled. But as Jace looked at the horizon, he knew that the hardest part was just beginning. Chapter 7. The Final Upload. The rooftop of the Aether-Net spire was a glass-and-steel island floating above a sea of chaos. Below, the city of Seattle looked like a circuit board short-circuiting. Power grids flickered as the residue algorithm, now a digital wildfire, jumped from Aether-Net's backbone into the municipal nodes Wright had corrupted. Jace leaned against the ventilation housing, his chest heaving. His hands were still numb from the electrical surge, his fingertips stained a charcoal gray. Beside him, Maya was frantically typing on a cracked handheld deck, her face illuminated by the strobing red warning lights of the helipad. The broadcast is holding, Maya said, her voice shaking with a mix of exhaustion and triumph. It's mirrored on every major news hub, every peer-to-peer network, and 10,000 private servers. Wright can't kill it. He'd have to shut down the entire internet to stop the leak. Tessa. Jace called out. Tessa Anderson stepped out from the stairwell shadows, her weapons still drawn, scanning the perimeter. Her shoulder was bleeding where a graze had torn through her jacket. The tactical teams are in disarray. Their comms are jammed by the same loop you're broadcasting. But Callahan, he isn't a man who follows the signal. He's a hunter. He'll be coming up the maintenance lift. Suddenly, the heavy, pressurized doors of the helipad hiss-clicked open. It wasn't a squad of soldiers. It was a single man. Kevin Wright stepped onto the roof, his navy suit rumpled, his silver hair windswept. He didn't look like a defeated villain. He looked like a man watching a masterpiece burn. In his hand, he held a sleek, obsidian-colored tablet, the master key to Aether-Net's failsafe. "You've made quite a mess, Mr. Maddock," Wright said, his voice strangely calm over the howling wind. "You've destroyed $1 trillion infrastructure. You've crashed the markets. You've liberated secrets that will start 3 wars by breakfast. Do you feel like a hero?" "I feel like a man who just ran a virus scan on a cancer," Jace replied, stepping in front of Maya. Wright laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You think the truth is a cure? The truth is a toxin. People don't want to know that their leaders are corrupt. They want to know that their bank accounts are safe. By morning, the world won't be thanking you. They'll be hunting you for the blackout." He tapped a command on his tablet. "This is the last resort protocol. It doesn't just delete data. It physically overloads the cooling systems of every Ethernet hub on the West Coast. If I can't own the data, I'll turn the hardware into slag. Thousands of fires, Jace. Millions of lives disrupted. And I'll make sure the logs show your signature initiated the sequence." "You're insane," Maya hissed. "You'd burn the whole city just to cover your tracks." "I'd burn the world to stay in the light," Wright countered. He raised his thumb over the confirm button, but before he could press it, a red laser appeared on the center of his forehead. "Drop it, Kevin," Tessa said, her voice steady as a heartbeat. "The police frequency just came back up. I've patched the local precinct into your little speech. They heard every word about the last resort." Wright smirked. "And who will believe a detective whose daughter's private records are currently sitting on my blackmail server? One touch, Tessa, and she's a social pariah before she hits high school." Tessa's hand trembled for a fraction of a second. The silence on the roof was agonizing. "She won't have to worry about that," Jace said, his voice low and raspy. He looked at Maya, who nodded. "We didn't just upload your crimes, right? We uploaded the keys. 10 seconds ago, the Residual released the decryption algorithms for every blackmail file in your system. The leverage is gone. Everyone's secrets are out in the open. You have nothing to hold over anyone anymore." Wright's face transformed. The mask of the calm CEO shattered, revealing a raw, jagged desperation. He looked down at his tablet. The screen was scrolling with a single message, repeated 1,000,000 times over. "The dust has settled. You are exposed." "No," Wright whispered. He lunged toward Jace, his fingers clawing for the drive in Jace's pocket. But he never made it. A heavy, gloved hand caught Wright by the collar and slammed him against the glass railing. Callahan had arrived, but he wasn't looking at Jace or Maya. He was looking at Wright with the cold, murderous eyes of a man who had realized his employer's ship was sinking and that he was meant to go down with it. "The contracts are void, right?" Callahan growled. "The Black Ops Fund are just frozen by the SEC. You're a liability." "Callahan, wait," Wright gasped. "Tessa." Jace shouted, "Don't let him." Tessa moved to intervene, but a sudden explosion from the floor below rocked the building. The residue had hit the spire's primary power converters. The helipad tilted. In the confusion, Callahan shoved Wright toward the stairs, dragging him down into the darkness of the burning building, a predator taking his prey into the abyss. "Jace!" "The helicopter!" Maya pointed to a sleek, automated Aether-Net transport idling on the far side of the roof. "I've hacked the flight computer. It's the only way off this roof before the structure fails." They ran. Jace, Maya, and Tessa scrambled into the bay of the helicopter. As the rotors screamed to life and they lifted off into the smoky night, Jace looked down. The Aether-Net spire was a pillar of fire, a monument to a digital age that had finally collapsed under its own weight. High above the city, the 3 of them sat in silence. The city lights were returning, but they were different now, less organized, more fragile. Jace looked at Maya. She was staring at her hands, the blue light of the tablet finally fading as the battery died. "Is it over?" she asked. Jace looked at his own scarred palms. He felt the weight of the dust, algorithm still sitting in his pocket, the only copy left. "The system is broken, Maya, but for the first time in my life, the data is honest. Now we just have to see what the world builds with the wreckage." The helicopter turned toward the north, flying into the cold, clean dark of the mountains, leaving the blue hour behind for good. Epilogue. Residual traces. The world did not end with the fall of Aether-Net, but it shivered. In the weeks following the Great Cipher broadcast, the global financial markets underwent a violent recalibration. Governments scrambled to pass data sovereignty acts, and for a brief, chaotic month, the internet was a wild west of leaked secrets and sudden, uncomfortable transparency. Kevin Wright's name became shorthand for corporate hubris, a ghost story told in boardrooms to frighten ambitious young CEOs. 6 months later, the dust had truly settled. In a small, rain-drenched town on the coast of British Columbia, far from the fiber-optic veins of Seattle, a small bookstore and repair shop called the Analog Archive had recently opened. It was a quiet place, smelling of old paper and soldering flux. There were no smart mirrors, no facial recognition cameras, and the Wi-Fi was intentionally stubbornly slow. Jace Maddock sat at a scarred wooden workbench in the back, meticulously cleaning the corrosion off a vintage 1980s motherboard. His hands, though scarred, no longer trembled. The blue hour had been replaced by the soft, amber glow of a desk lamp and the natural rhythm of the tide outside his window. The bell above the door chimed. Jace didn't look up immediately. "We're closed for lunch, but if it's a hardware emergency, leave it on the counter." "I think this qualifies as an emergency," a familiar voice said. Jace froze. He looked up to see Tessa Anderson. She looked different, younger, her face free of the perpetual tension that had defined her in Seattle. She was wearing a simple trench coat, her hair down, and she held a small manila envelope. "Tessa," Jace breathed, standing up. "How did you find me? I thought I'd scrub my physical trail." "You did," she smiled, leaning against the counter. "But you forgot that I'm a detective who doesn't like cold cases. And Maya's encryption isn't as impenetrable as she thinks. At least, not when she wants someone to find her." "How is she?" Jace asked, his voice softening. "She's in Zurich, helping the International Task Force rebuild the banking protocols," Tessa said. "She's the consultant of last resort. They pay her in untraceable hardware and privacy. She sent me to give you this." She slid the envelope across the counter. Jace opened it. Inside was a single, high-capacity glass substrate drive. It was cold to the touch. "What is it?" "The final version of the Residual," Tessa explained. "Maya cleaned it. It's no longer a virus or a parasite. It's a watchdog. She's releasing it into the public domain tomorrow. A piece of code that lives in the gaps of the internet, looking for the next Kevin Wright before he can grow too big." Jace turned the drive over in his hand. "A ghost that protects the living." "Exactly," Tessa said. She looked around the quiet shop. "You like it here? No monitors, no triple displays?" Jace looked at his workbench, then out the window at the gray, churning ocean. "I spent my life trying to fix the past, Tessa. Here, if something breaks, it's usually just a mechanical gear or a loose wire. It's tangible. It's honest. Maya wanted me to tell you one more thing," Tessa added, turning to leave. She said the rounding errors are finally at 0. The ledger is balanced. After Tessa left, Jace sat back down at his bench. He looked at the glass drive. For a moment, he considered plugging it in just to see the emerald green text one last time, to hear the voice that pulled him out of his loneliness. Instead, he walked over to a small floor safe hidden beneath a stack of old magazines. He placed the drive inside and locked it. The world didn't need a hero today, and it didn't need a hacker. It just needed someone to keep the record clean. He returned to his motherboard, picked up his magnifying glass, and went back to work. On the street outside, a young girl walked by, looking at her smartphone. For a split second, the screen flickered with a faint emerald green pulse, a tiny digital heartbeat hidden in the static. Then it was gone, lost like dust in the wind. The truth was out there, and for the first time in a long time, it was breathing.
Thank you for listening to Digital Dust, a Shiver Audiobooks production. We've traveled a long way together, from the rain-slicked streets of Seattle to the desolate, salt-crusted shores of Oysterville, and finally into the obsidian heart of the Aether-Net spire, where the fate of the global truth was decided in a single pulse of light. Jace and Maya's journey reminds us that in a world governed by cold algorithms and sterile logic, the most powerful thing we still possess is our own beautiful, messy survival instinct. The glass world protocol has been paused, the machine has been shown its own reflection, and the truth has finally fought its way back into the light. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please consider leaving a like and sharing the video. It's the best way to help our channel grow and ensures we can keep bringing these high-stakes, cinematic worlds to life. A massive thank you to our subscribers. You are the digital resistance that keeps this signal alive. Without your support, stories like this will remain buried in the encrypted dust of the system. Before you go, let us know in the comments. If you found out that a single line of your own code could decide the fate of the world's secrets, would you embrace the responsibility, or would you fear the burden? Is Kevin Wright's system worth saving, or is it time for a total reset until the next record is unsealed? Stay alert, stay curious, and keep reading between the lines.